Gospel legend Mama Mosie Burks is no longer with us, and the recent confession by Tamela Mann has left many people shocked and heartbroken. For years, Mosie Burks used her powerful voice to uplift others. Her songs gave people strength, comfort, and hope. But in her final days, the woman who brought joy to so many lived in heartbreaking silence. There were no phone calls, no visits, not even from people she once called family. And now, Tamila Man has spoken out, in tears, sharing a truth that no one expected. Mosie Burks was one of those names in gospel music that people respected deeply. She was known all over the world as the strong, soulful voice of the Mississippi Mass Choir. Her singing could shake the walls of a church and move people to tears. Her songs like When I Rose This Morning and I'm Not Tired Yet were not just gospel hits, they were declarations of faith and strength. But while her music inspired millions, something very painful was happening behind closed doors. As Mosie got older, she slowly stepped out of the spotlight. People thought she was simply enjoying retirement. But the reality was different. Her health had declined, and she was suffering not only physically but also emotionally and spiritually. She was slowly being forgotten. People who once stood beside her on stage stopped visiting. Family members who once praised her were rarely around. According to people close to her, Mosie spent her last months mostly alone in a quiet room. A neighbor who lived nearby said there were weeks where no one came to visit. She would just sit by the window, looking outside, hoping to see someone she knew. It's heartbreaking to think that a woman who gave so much love and energy to the gospel world was left alone when she needed love the most. Tamela Mann was one of the few who tried to reach out. In a recent podcast interview, Tamela broke down in tears as she spoke about what really happened. She said she waited for someone else to say it, but when no one did, she felt it was her duty to speak up. Tamela revealed that she had tried several times to visit Mosie, but she was told by some of Mosie's family members that Mosie was too tired for visitors. However, Tamela believes Mosie wasn't tired of visitors, she was tired of being ignored. Tamela said she felt abandoned too, just like Mosie. Despite all her years of success in gospel music and television, she also experienced moments when people from her church family turned their backs on her. This situation reopened painful memories for Tamela. She had looked up to Mosie as a spiritual mother. To find out that someone so important to her died feeling lonely and forgotten crushed her. She was angry not just at the situation but at the way people rushed to post tributes online after Mosie passed, even though they had ignored her while she was still alive. In her emotional interview, Tamela asked a tough question. Where were all these people when Mosie was alive and crying alone in her room? Posting old videos and sharing kind words after death doesn't make up for the silence during life. Her words hit home for many fans and gospel music lovers. Her message wasn't about stirring drama. It was a cry for truth, a plea for honesty in a community that should care more deeply about its own. After Tamela's interview went viral, there were mixed reactions. Many people supported her and praised her for being brave enough to speak out. But others accused her of trying to cause division in the gospel world. Some people felt she was making Mosie's death about herself. But Tamela didn't back down. On her social media, she shared a quote that said, "People will sing your praises while you're in the casket, but ignore your cries while you're still alive." She said this reminded her of Mosie, and it was exactly how she felt. Mosie's story reveals some uncomfortable truths about how the gospel community treats its elders. People are celebrated when they're in the spotlight, but when they grow old or get sick, they're often forgotten. Even major gospel leaders who had once performed with Mosie didn't visit her in her final days. Some of them haven't even responded to questions about why they stayed away. The story took another emotional turn when a retired hospice nurse who had cared for Mosie in her final weeks revealed something shocking. She said that Mosie had written a private letter and placed it inside her Bible. She asked that it be read only if the truth about her final days was being ignored. Since that truth wasn't being told, parts of the letter have now been shared. The words are deeply moving and painful. In the letter, Mosie wrote, "If I have gone home to glory and they say I was at peace, let them know peace don't come from silence. I missed y'all. I waited. I forgave, but I was lonely. God stood by me, but my people did not." These words have stunned everyone who heard them. They reveal that Mosie was not just sick, she was heartbroken. She wasn't asking for money or fame, she just wanted love, a simple phone call, a visit, a moment of care. Even more painful was another line in the letter: "They will cry loud for me in public, but I cried for them in private. I only wish they knew." That line has made many people question their own actions. How many others are suffering in silence right now, waiting for someone to care? The letter also mentioned Tamela Mann. Mosie wrote, "Tell Tamila I heard her song when the nurse played it. Take me to the king." That's exactly what I asked him to do. When Tamila read those words, she was overcome with emotion. She shared on Instagram that she wished she could have had just one more moment with Mosie. People have now begun calling what happened the betrayal of a gospel legend. They say it's a sign that the industry needs to change. Gospel music is supposed to be about love, community, and faith. But what happened to Mosie shows that sometimes, people forget the most important lessons. She gave her entire life to her faith, her music, and her people. And in the end, she was left waiting for someone to knock on her door. This story is not just about one person. It's a warning to all of us. We need to take better care of our elders, especially those who gave their lives to serve others. We need to check on the people who once gave us strength. We need to show up not just with flowers at their funeral, but with our presence while they're still alive. Tamila's message has opened up a conversation that was long overdue. Fans are now asking, who else is suffering in silence? What other gospel legends are sitting in quiet rooms, waiting for someone to remember them? This should not be the way we treat our heroes. The gospel community is about more than just singing and shouting. It's about living the love that we sing about. Mosie Burks may be gone, but her message lives on. Through her final letter, her songs, and now through Tamila's voice, she continues to teach us. She reminds us that love should be shown not just in public displays but in private acts of care. Her life was a testimony, and so was her death. Let her story be a lesson. Reach out to the people who once inspired you. Call the elders in your life. Visit those who may feel forgotten. Because one day, it might be too late. And the cries they made in private may haunt us forever. Mosie Burks gave her all to gospel music and to God's people. Let's not let her legacy end in silence. Let's honor her by changing how we care for others. Not just with songs, but with actions. Not just after they're gone, but while they're still here. That's the kind of love Mosie deserved. And it's the kind of love we must now give, before it's too late. Mama Mosie Burks was more than just a gospel singer. She was a force of nature, a voice that carried pain, joy, and hope all at once. For many people, her music wasn't just entertainment, it was healing. But in the final chapter of her life, the woman who had comforted millions with her voice was left in silence. No one came to visit. No one called. And the saddest part is, some of the people she loved and supported the most turned away when she needed them. Her story has left a deep mark, not just on her fans, but on the entire gospel world. What happened to Mama Mosie isn't just a sad ending, it's a mirror that's now being held up to everyone in the industry. Tamila Man, a respected gospel artist herself, finally said what so many were thinking but were too afraid to say. In a moment filled with emotion, she stood up during a live-streamed gospel event and told the truth. She said she would have sung to Mosie not to perform, but simply to comfort her. Her words hit hard. They weren't planned or polished. They came straight from the heart. And in that moment, it became clear that something in the gospel community had gone terribly wrong. People began asking serious questions. Why was Mosie left alone in her final days? Where were all the people who used to praise her? Where were the artists who stood beside her on stage, the pastors who welcomed her into their churches, the choirs who followed her lead? Many of them were silent. Some posted vague messages saying rest in peace, but they didn't mention the pain Mosie had been carrying. That silence said more than words ever could. And fans noticed. They took to social media, expressing their disappointment and anger. This wasn't just about Mosie anymore. It had become something bigger. A wake-up call. The gospel industry has always been seen as a place of unity, love, and support. People come to gospel music looking for inspiration and comfort, believing that behind the powerful voices and church choirs, there's a strong community that lives by the messages it sings about. But Mosie's story revealed a deep crack in that image. As the news of her lonely final days spread, whispers turned into tension. That tension turned into full-on outrage. Not in the tabloids, but in churches, choir lofts, and prayer groups across the country. People were starting to realize that the gospel world had a problem. And that problem had a name: abandonment. For decades, legends like Mama Mosie Burks carried the gospel world on their shoulders. They sang in giant arenas, brought crowds to tears, and gave their all to the music and the message. But what happens when those legends grow old? When they can't sing anymore? When their voices fade and they stop appearing on viral videos? Far too often, they are forgotten. Quietly, and sometimes deliberately. Sources close to the Mississippi Mass Choir and independent gospel artists revealed that behind the scenes, there were serious disagreements about how to treat aging gospel pioneers like Mosie. Some people believed in creating support funds to help them retire with dignity and love. Others argued that the industry should focus on younger, more marketable talent. Sadly, the second group usually won. That's the truth Tamila Man bravely spoke out about. Her voice cracked with emotion as she looked into the camera and said that gospel can't be about business first. It was never meant to be. Gospel music is supposed to be about love, faith, and compassion. But when artists like Mosie are left to die alone, something is very wrong. The room she was speaking in went completely silent. People felt the weight of her words. But not everyone took it well. Some senior pastors and powerful promoters in the gospel world were upset. They felt attacked. One even said, "This ain't TMZ. This is church. We don't do scandal here." But what Tamila said wasn't scandal, it was truth. And fans watching at home saw the irony. Because the real scandal wasn't Tamila speaking out. The real scandal was the silence that allowed someone like Mosie to be forgotten. Tamila wasn't alone. Her words lit a fire in the hearts of a younger generation of gospel artists. Singers like Corinne Hawthorne, Jonathan McReynolds, and Leandria Johnson began speaking up too. They echoed Tamila's message and called for real action. They wanted to create a gospel legacy council, something official, dedicated to taking care of gospel legends in their old age. They talked about wellness check-ins, emotional support, and financial help for retired artists. They even suggested mentorship programs where younger artists could learn from older ones and keep their wisdom alive. Despite all this momentum, not everyone was ready for change. The divide between the new generation and the old guard remained. Some people still refused to admit there was a problem. But others couldn't ignore the truth anymore. One retired musician who had worked with Mosie back in the 1990s said something that shook the entire online community. He said, "There are people who built their careers on Mosie's fire. But when her flame grew dim, they acted like she never existed." That statement went viral. People flooded the comments with messages like, "This is heartbreaking, and we've got to do better." One person said, "Why do we wait until someone dies to show them love?" It's a question Tamila asked herself during a recent interview. She said she didn't want to keep going to funerals where people bring flowers too late. "The time to love is now," she said. "The time to see our legends is now, while they still remember who we are." That's why she's now organizing something called the Remembered Summit. It's a live event where living gospel legends will be celebrated, honored, and surrounded with love. Not when they're gone, but while they're still here. And this might be the most powerful part of the whole story. Even though Mama Mosie Burks is no longer with us, her silence in those final days has turned into a roar. Her story is now being talked about in every church, every gospel livestream, and every choir rehearsal. People are asking themselves hard questions. How do we treat the people who gave everything for the music we love? How do we make sure this doesn't happen again? It hurts to think that someone who gave so much could end her life feeling forgotten. But sometimes, the biggest changes come from the deepest pain. Whether she meant to or not, Mosie Burks has started something. Her life, and the way it ended, has forced the gospel community to take a long, hard look at itself. Since Tamela Mann's emotional outcry, things have started to change. Slowly, but surely. Some artists have started gospel family check-in programs where they call or visit retired legends every month. Churches are building legacy walls to honor the lives of elder choir members while they're still alive to see it. And most touchingly, Tamila and her husband David Mann have launched something called Moses Table. It's a fund that provides food, medical help, and friendship for forgotten gospel pioneers. But this isn't just about charity. It's about healing the gap between what gospel music says and what it actually does. For years, gospel songs have preached about unity and love. But in real life, too many legends have been left in the shadows. That has to stop. Moses' story has held up a mirror to everyone in the community, forcing them to ask, are we living what we sing? One of Moses' old choir members shared something beautiful at her memorial. She said, Mosie wouldn't want us to cry too long. She'd want us to sing louder, love stronger, live better. But she'd also want us to do better for the next Mosie. For the ones still with us. That's what makes this story so important. Because right now, there are so many gospel legends living in silence. Elderly singers, musicians, and choir members who once brought joy to thousands are now sitting alone, forgotten, with no one checking in on them. That cycle has to end. This isn't just about one woman's death. It's about the kind of love and care we give people while they're still alive. It's about making sure that legends aren't only celebrated after they're gone. It's about changing the culture of silence and abandonment that has quietly taken root in the gospel world. So let's make this the moment we finally shift direction. Let's make Moses' name echo louder than ever, not just in our playlists, but in our actions. For every time we say rest in peace, let's also say, how are you doing today, to someone who might feel forgotten. Let's make checking in, honoring, and supporting part of the gospel mission. To Mama Mosie Burks, thank you. You sang like an angel. You lived with grace. And even in your silence, you spoke a truth that the world desperately needed to hear. You reminded us that sometimes the loudest message is the one left unspoken. You reminded us to love, loudly and openly, before it's too late. Let us carry forward what you stood for. Let us never forget that behind every famous gospel voice is a person with a heart that feels, that breaks, and that longs to be remembered. Let this be the beginning of a new gospel era, one filled with compassion, honesty, and real love. And let your name, Mama Mosie Burks, be the anthem that leads us there.